most part, I feel the same way about what the Houston Texans did last Thursday. I'm relieved that they drafted a quarterback, any quarterback, and I like that on top of that, they traded into the number 3 overall pick to go and get Will Anderson. I understand some hesitation about what the Texans gave up to get Anderson, swapping pick 12 for 3, giving up pick 33, giving up their first round pick next year, giving up a third round pick. That's a lot. But at the same time, given the lack of energy surrounding any conversation with this team, I get why they did it. It was about more than just the X's and O's, the football. But sometimes you make a purchase and a week later you regret it because you realize, oh, I'm not going to use this. An example, when that Hogwarts Legacy video game came out, I thought to myself, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to play this and I'm going to stream myself playing this on Twitch and YouTube and stuff. YouTube.com/PaulGallant, Twitch.tv/Gallant says.
Unbelievable.
What?
That was seamless right there.
What, Sean? In case
keep going.
I ever do it. So I bought the game, and then because per Pottermore, the website that allows you to do some Harry Potter stuff on the side, I would be in House Slytherin. I bought a Slytherin robe online for $70. Stupid purchase because guess how many times I have even taken it out of the package? 0. Guess how many times I've played Hogwarts Legacy? Once. That was probably a total of $150 that I just pissed down the drain between the two of those things. But at the time when I bought it, I was like, this is hilarious. This is going to be great. And yet here we are. I'm not saying that's what the Will Anderson trade is, but another thing you got to consider, when everybody is saying the same thing nationally about you, yeah, they might not be as educated on a subject about the team that you cover on a daily basis, but without any attachment, they actually might be right. How often are you right when you stubbornly hold your ground against a consensus opinion? Because the consensus opinion is that the Texans traded way too much to trade up to get Will Anderson. So I'm wavering on how I feel. And to make matters worse, I was listening to the Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny, a podcast. I think Mina Kimes is pretty good when it comes to talking about football, and I especially love when she brings on a former NFL cornerback, Dominique Foxworth, also of ESPN, on the podcast. And there's been something that's been being pushed for those who don't want to admit the Texans gave up a lot to trade up for Will Anderson. I will at least acknowledge that they gave up a lot. I just get why they made the move. It's this idea that in trading up for Will Anderson, they were actually trading for C.J. Stroud. And maybe I didn't do a very good job of explaining why that's a load of BS, but I really think that both Dominique Foxworth and Mina Kimes did a very good job explaining in bigger words what I wasn't able to do. Here is Dominique Foxworth with Mina chiming in on the most recent episode of that show.
I've yet to hear a coherent argument on the other side of that, because the package deal doesn't work, because like if we had 2 picks in the draft and then there was a week between that and the 3rd pick, the analysis should be the same as if there was a minute between those.
Yes.
Picks.
Oh, thank you.
Once that happened, then, as you mentioned, the landscape changed. So don't try to wrap it up into a package deal, because it wasn't a package deal. If that were the case, then we could make arguments across 5 years of drafts to say, oh, it's all right, just wrap it all up. It's one big package. It worked out. That was a good deal. They won the Super Bowl 5 years later. No, it's a terrible deal. It's no way that you can get this value unless Will Anderson turns out to be Lawrence Taylor.
What they said is that you're not giving up And to wrap it up with that Lawrence Taylor point, by the way, Jesus. That's
Seems like a little bit of hyperbole.
but it's a good hyperbole statement to make if you really want to make someone sit. I mean, it took me a second. I was like, oh yeah, I forgot. He said he has to be Lawrence Taylor.
He has to be the greatest defensive lineman of all time.
The greatest defensive player of all time. Like, not arguable. Lawrence Taylor's the greatest defender ever. I mean, the guy was showing up like to games after like going on benders and perhaps still having coke in his system and still would go out, show up like at the middle of the first quarter and have 5 sacks in a game.
Like James Harden in game 1.
Oh, stop. He didn't follow it up with bad performances. But look, it's not about trading for that number 3 pick and getting Will Anderson and getting CJ Stroud, getting the package deal. It's about you could have had CJ Stroud and pick 12 and pick 33, which you could have turned into other things, and you could have had your first round pick next year, which, let's be honest, that's going to be top 15. I'm not saying it's the end of the world that they traded up for Will Anderson. I get why they did it, so I'm not going to criticize them for it. But you are giving up a lot of cracks at the bat, if you will, draft swings to go and get this guy in Will Anderson, and he does have to be great to rationalize the move. They stayed on this subject on the most recent episode of the Mina Kimes Show featuring Lenny for a good 5 to 6 minutes. Here's Mina expanding on it with a strange analogy, but the analogy works.
It's like you buy a car for $5,000 and then you spend $15,000 in tires and you say $20,000 is an okay price for a car. That's how you're trying to justify it right now. And you could have invested that $15,000 and it's a guarantee that $15,000 could have been doubled if you invested it. And all you got was tires.
Oh, man. I'm sorry, Will Anderson. You're better than tires.
He is. I know. Then I was like, I'm not trying to compare him to tires. He's a good player. Okay.
And then on top of it, like, I guess we don't know how strong next year's draft is, but we do know that this year is thought of as not a very strong draft. So if you factor that into the value of the pick, it gets even worse.
Right. And yes, as E315 says, tires don't cost $15,000. Terrible analogy. You're right, but I mean, that's the way it's being justified online by the people who are acting like actually they were trading for CJ Stroud when they traded up. They weren't. They traded for Will Anderson. It was for Will Anderson. You can't say it was a package deal because you made picks back to back. A lot of people are pushing that. I'm sorry. I'm just not accepting it. I'm not. It's this trying to over-explain an aggressive, bold move. It's just an aggressive, bold move, and if it pays out, great. Odds are it probably won't pan out in the way that we want it to pan out, but hey, let's call it what it is. So I'm wavering a little bit on the trade and how I feel about it. I still get why they did it. I still like what they did, but I also understand the huge risk. And everyone's saying that this wasn't a smart move long term. Who am I to be one of the few people digging in their heels and saying, yeah, they're wrong. They're all wrong. Because we have done this before in this city when it comes to football. I remember being the first person to pick up my hot take guns and start firing them at Brock Osweiler. Because everyone was like, it just takes time. He's going to figure it out. And I was like, well, we watched this guy in Denver. He wasn't that good then. Peyton Manning was just nearly headless. So that's why Osweiler stepped in. Now, Osweiler did okay, but he didn't really do anything. People were talking about this victory that he had in New England. And it was like, the Patriots lost that game in the snow because they muffed a punt up 21-7. Brock Osweiler had nothing to do with it. And the Broncos had a bunch of like 70-yard touchdown runs.
I was going to say, didn't CJ Anderson run for like 300 yards or something?
Yeah, it was an insane game. And people were pointing at that like, well, he beat the Patriots. And I'm like, he was there for the Patriots game. Paul Galancho, ESPN 97.5 and 92.5, 713-780-3776 to call and then text in. A couple of comments on Twitch, twitch.tv/ESPN 97.5. Everyone wants to save up picks like they're bearer bonds. I'm with you in that the people that cling to the idea that all these picks are going to pan out are also a little bit too optimistic. The thing that Foxworth and Kimes said a little bit later is that this maybe prevents you from getting someone like Marvin Harrison in next year's draft, Marvin Harrison Jr. And Will Anderson hopefully makes a huge difference on the defensive side of things. And if he does, again, there's going to be a lot of people who will be eating their words talking about the trade. But it is a lot. You can't deny it. And this was not all one package deal.